Hi, everybody. This is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It is Wednesday, November 27th, and I'm sitting down to make part 3 of a series I've been doing on Jupiter's entrance into Capricorn, which is happening next week. I suggest you watch the first 2 parts of this series if you haven't first, but you can watch this standalone if you want to. And today's episode, you could say, I'm going to be focusing on Jupiter's relationship to Saturn, Jupiter moving into Saturn's sign of Capricorn, and time, Saturn being one of the symbolic rulers of time in astrology, and what that means for you personally, what that means for all of us over the course of the next year. Before I do that, a reminder, I'm fundraising the last 40 days of the year. I do an annual Kickstarter. If you enjoy my channel, if you like my work, please pitch in and help me reach my goal of 420 backers by January 1st. I think we're at about 145 or 147 or something like that. Pick up a reward reading. I make it for you personally and send it to you as a recording, just like you're watching right now. Or you can get greatly discounted tuition to my online certification courses. I've taken hundreds and hundreds of people through my courses over the last 10 years. It is a 1-year course in ancient astrology that begins in June and then another one in November. You can attend either of those and get my best rates of the year. This is part of how I support myself as an astrologer, how I support my family. So it's hugely appreciated. I spend a lot of time every single day spending time centering myself in spiritual practice and then creating the content that I think is going to be not only astrologically valuable to you, but spiritually valuable. So if you're a fan and you want to see this work grow and evolve, send me your prayers, your good wishes, and if you can contribute and donate, I appreciate it. All right, so today, again, we're talking about Jupiter moving into Capricorn, the sign of its fall. We talked in the first video how this was called the gateway of death. It is a place that is associated with the winter solstice and what was called the gateway of death because this is the place where the spirit is thought to leave the body, as opposed to the sign of Jupiter's exaltation in Cancer, where Jupiter is associated with the gateway of life, where the soul comes into the body and there's association with birth. Jupiter likes birth and proliferation and life and abundance. It's a little bit more challenging when Jupiter is in the sign of the gateway of death. So this is a low point for Jupiter in some ways. We talked about those in the first 2 videos, but there's this other interesting relationship that Jupiter has to Saturn, and that is, and I mentioned this in video 1, we didn't go so much into it, which is that Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions are known as basically milestone markers, the signifiers of great changes in history or the time in your life when you may be passing from one era to another. The great conjunctions throughout history of Jupiter and Saturn, for example, even as early as 7 BCE, I believe it was, they believed that maybe Jupiter-Saturn conjunction was responsible for the star that led the Magi to the birth of Jesus, just as an example. In that kind of story work, the framework of that story, people have speculated that maybe that was a great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions have this very rich history behind them in astrology. And the 2 of them have a relationship to changes in time, the quality of time, like a time signature in a piece of music that's changing. So that's where we're heading in today's talk. Now, I want to talk about 2 things that come up in most of the readings that I have with people. There are 2 general attitudes that people take toward life and toward their spirituality, toward their civic, social, political, cultural engagement. And I'd say about 60 to 70% of my clients fall in the first category we're going to talk about, and that's this. There is a tendency to identify with the future in this way. When a client sits down with me and I say, what can I help you with today? They'll say, look, I just want to make sure that I'm on the right path, that I'm taking the right path forward. So right away, when someone asks that question, there are assumptions that are being made. And we can't help it. I mean, we're human. I'm not trying to blame anyone or how unevolved or anything. But the assumption that's made is like this. My actions right now are taking me towards some kind of a future. And I want to make sure it's the right future, the right result or the right outcome in the future. And people are really invested in that, and they want to make sure that they get it right. And they're concerned about this spiritually and morally. Like, I want to do the right thing, become the right person, etc. So we see this also in, culturally, historically. We say we need to do the right thing for future generations. We need to do the work to make a better world. So the idea is one of progress into the future. The key word that's often used in sort of New Age astrology speak is evolution, right? Like we're evolving somehow toward something. And that something could be a higher state of consciousness, a more evolved or enlightened society, etc. But it is the idea of work being done towards the future and concern with getting something right in the future. It's human, it's perennial, and it is also archetypal. This is the language of Jupiter. Traditionally, Jupiter is the god of spring and a god that is associated with proliferation, abundance, and the abolishment of the old. Jupiter, Zeus, usurps Saturn, the old king, and becomes the new king. And so Jupiter is generally associated with that, which is new. Okay, so I'm not judging it, anything, just kind of laying it out there. Jupiter's relationship to time tends to be one of triumphing over the past. I once was lost, but now I'm found, or I'm on the path to becoming found. Ignorance in the past, progress and enlightenment in the future. Bad times in the rear view, you know what I mean? Freedom and bliss on the open road ahead. Jupiter. That's how when we relate to time, our experience of time, in that way, where it's a sort of Jupiterian God, we're seeing through the lens of that God. Maybe like 30%, 40% of my clients come in with a different story, and that's version 2. That's Saturn's take on time. Saturn was the ruler of the Golden Age. And the Golden Age, when you read about it, it's like, sounds pretty nice. And it's an ideal society where there's peace, harmony, everyone's working together. They have their different roles, but there's a general sense of everyone sort of having a meaningful contribution and getting along and so forth, and peace and prosperity and so on. And this Golden Age, when people come in interested in Saturn in the Golden Age, here's what it sounds like. They'll go like, oh, what are you here for? Well, when I was a child, these things happened to me. Or when I was younger, I did these things, or some trauma occurred. And what I really want to do is I'm trying to heal and work on those things and get back to wholeness. I want to get back to myself. I just got out of a relationship where I really lost myself. I'm trying to get back to me. Getting back to something that was lost. I've fragmented and I need wholeness. The idea of something kind of breaking and then wanting to pick up the pieces and put it back together. That's a Saturn archetype, insofar as Saturn rules the idea of an ideal that existed in the past that we have fallen away from. The Golden Age. So far fewer people that I talk to come in with this, but it's really a dominant model in, say, most modern forms of counseling and psychology, where there's going to be a huge emphasis on like healing and restoring wholeness from childhood wounds or childhood abandonment, or things like that. And again, is it legitimate? Sure, of course it is. This is one of the archetypal ways in which we experience time. This is why their conjunctions are so great. Let's explore these two ways of relating to time in the New Age. New Age, we have something like this. Forward at all costs, right? Somewhere in the future exists the better, more enlightened version of your soul, of your spirit, of people, of humanity, of our potential. And so that's the progressive Jupiterian New Age spirit. Marry it to Saturn and the way we're going to get there is to implement, let's say, all of the Atlantean sciences that were lost. Or in order to get there, we have to go back to like a matriarchal civilization and replace the patriarchy. We're about to birth some great new thing, and it also means that we're going to have to get back to something that was lost. That's how they join together in the New Age. But in the New Age, the version of let's get back to the past that often presents itself is like, let's go back to the Garden of Eden. Let's go back to the garden, like the song in the 60s, right? Who was that? Crosby, Stills, Nash, or was it Joni Mitchell? Back to the Garden. Let's get back to Paradise Lost. We've fallen away from that. We need to get back to that. I just need to be like naked and roaming around the woods, or do you know what I mean? Let's get back to natural. It's become so artificial. We're on the Aquarian age. It's about progress. We're leaping forward in human consciousness. History is a story about evolutionary progress. Age of Aquarius, we're about to leap forward. Or you have, for example, we're in the Kali Yuga. This is the age of Kali. And everything's dark and ignorant. And when we get out of this age, we'll return to a golden age. We'll return to a blissful age. I want to read to you something from The Great Year by Nicholas Campion. It's a pretty simple passage. Progress theory, therefore, generally, though not invariably, dispenses with all other myths presupposing a lost innocence, including the golden race, the golden age, the Garden of Eden, and the fall. In its pure form, progress theory assumes that history moves not in a complete cycle culminating in the return to bliss, but through a half cycle, opening with a low point and rising to a once and for all peak. We start with a low point. We once were lost. We got lost. We fell. And eventually in the future, we progress and get it right. Evolutionary astrology, to a certain extent in the modern era, for example, fills our ears with the narrative that in past lives, you got a lot of things wrong. In future lives, progressively, you're doing your homework and getting it right and getting things better. This is a Jupiterian way of looking at time and process and projecting that archetypal value onto the life of the soul. So he goes through a long passage here that I won't read in full, but I will read this. Progress theory took from ancient cycle and wave theories the belief that movement through time is qualitative. The importance of this single point cannot be stressed too much, for it underpins many aspects of contemporary Western culture. The cult of the new and contempt for the old-fashioned, for instance, which affects so much Western art and design, is based on the belief that what happened in a former time must be inferior. Such radicalism is often exactly counterbalanced by a nostalgic belief that everything that took place in the past was superior by that very fact. In its purest form, progress theory acknowledges only improvement through time. And you could say the opposite about, people who are stuck in the past, that they believe that time is about degeneration or de-evolution, and that we were at some place in the past that was better. These are the two extremes of Jupiter and Saturn. And they play out in the mythology of Jupiter, Saturn, and they play out in the great cycles and conjunctions of Jupiter, Saturn as well. Because whenever a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction comes around, what do? We go looking for a way of joining the two together. We're on the brink of a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. I was born during a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. What do I do for a living? I teach a course called Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic. Let's take the old and let's make it new. Let's make something new by returning to what's old and maybe lost or forgotten. Evolution means returning to some kind of golden age roots. On the other hand, trying to marry them together, we could say we're trying to marry modern innovation with ancient timeless wisdom. Do you see what I'm saying? Jupiter, Saturn are always trying to do things like that. And sometimes they're really opposed and sometimes they're really together on it. Jupiter in its fall in Saturn's sign is going to place a pressure on us historically and personally and collectively. The weight of history, we'll feel it in the next year. You'll be like, I have to redeem the past. That's a Jupiter in its fall in Saturn's sign kind of thing. I have to get it right this time. Or I have to return to something that I lost. I have to get to wholeness. On the other hand, the story could be more like, I need to start a new chapter that will once and for all take me forward, and it's going to evolve and enlighten me. But there's this sense of doing it in contrast to some kind of ignorance in the past. These dichotomies you will feel as weightier realities dealing with more difficult choices that feel like more critical junctures in the plot line of your life. That's what it is in a certain sense. You just dealing with personal history. Collective history is going to feel like that too. The planet is burning up. Are we going to do something or are we going to die? Does hell await us or does heaven await us? What kind of future will we make? Are we about to go through the collective birth canal of a higher state of consciousness? You heard that before, right? Or are we in Kali Yuga? And do we need to get back to the truth of our timeless, ancient, mystical ancestors or something like that? Because we're about to burn up the planet. I'm just using this kind of basic burn up the planet motif, but it's always something. Throughout history, astrology has always been part and parcel with a view toward human history and either the need to return to something lost that's been broken, forgotten, fallen, or to move towards something that is better, more enlightened, and progressive. Astrology has always dealt with those impulses because they are perennial archetypal impulses. So, what can we say about them? What can we say about those impulses? Well, first of all, neither of them are bad. But on the other hand, if we relate to either of the two of those impulses without recognizing that they are archetypal, we become possessed by them. That is where the dogma of planetary archetypes come in, and we are seized by gods, we become their puppets. People who live with the idea that spiritual progress has to do with getting something right that you got wrong in the past are people who are relating to the idea of spiritual life possessed by a god, in, let's say, in a general sense, Jupiter. On the other hand, people who think that we have lost our way, we need to return to a golden age. And they project that onto spirituality. They say, this is the story of spiritual growth. They are possessed by worshiping at the altar of a god. And one of the points I want to make today is that it's kind of inevitable that we're going to have one of those two perspectives because we just tend to be that way. It's hard because it's part of being a creature who is in part a historical being. We are creatures of history. We have history, we make history, we deal with the feeling and the apparent reality of past, present, and future. Ancient people did not think that time was an illusion. They thought that time was cyclical. They thought that time was never ending. They thought that time itself paradoxically was eternal. So the other answer is also not to tell people, well, just be timeless. It's like, oh, congratulations, you're so enlightened, right? As far as I can tell, what ancient people were saying was that time and timelessness are real. Many, many things that appear contradictory hold simultaneous reality in the universe, in reality itself. They are both real, even though it seems like both can't be real at the same time. Time is sort of real and it's unreal. This is why Plato said time is the moving image of eternity. Time is a kind of reflected image of that which is eternal. It's like saying there's a circle that's always moving. That's time. The circle itself, there's a sense in which there is a circle holding the movement of something inside of it. The movement being held by the circle is time. The circle holding that movement is eternity. But they're both real. So the question, I think, to get real esoteric here, the question in a year where such weighty feelings of history and how we're relating to past or future, how does that get sorted out within us? How do we deal with that? Well, one of the things that I think about is like, it goes back to my practice of bhakti yoga, which is the idea that more important than getting it right in the future or getting it wrong in the past or trying to somehow transcend time and space itself has to do with the quality of our relationship with time. It's not ultimately about whether you're more of a Jupiter person or whether you're more of a Saturn person or whether you figured out the perfect balance between the two or whether you've discarded the notion of time altogether. It's not really about any of those things. It's about love. So let me try to explain. I'll tell you a story. When I was a kid, I have this very vivid memory of walking down the street with a friend of mine. We were walking down the street pushing our bikes, and it was almost sunset, like total idyllic childhood moment. And as we were walking by the Army Reserve, which was right by my house, and as we're walking by the Army Reserve, my friend paused and told me something private about his parents. And it was a real, like, adult moment. Like, he shared something that was really heavy for me at the time. It shattered my sense of living in an idyllic space. It made me uncertain about the future. It made me suddenly feel like I was out of the garden. You know what I mean? And what I remember about that moment and what he shared with me that was privately happening with his parents was that even more than I remember the anxiety that it brought up in me, I remember how that moment deepened our friendship. He shared with me these things that I did not know how to respond to. I was not mature enough to handle. Um, and I just listened. And I think if I remember correctly, I like put my arm around him or something. And it was just like a moment of connecting on the heart with my buddy. And I remember that from that moment on, I felt a deeper loyalty to him, a deeper love for him, and just a deeper sense of knowing him and being close to him. It was as though something timeless existed between us. And I call that timeless thing love. It's not love in the lovey-dovey, super positivistic sense. It's not love can conquer anything. It's not love takes me into the future. Love heals all the hurts from the past. It was a subtle, quiet, pervasive feeling of something that I shared with him that was tender and sweet and timeless. And he is dear to me to this day, even though we're not still friends. If I think about him, that memory and many other memories too, but that memory in particular created a kind of timeless space. Many people come and go in and out of our lives. One of my favorite lines in a Stephen King movie, book turned into a movie called Stand By Me, which has to do with the loss of innocence for a young group of boys who find a childhood friend of theirs dead on the side of a railroad track. The novella was called The Body. At the end of the movie, the narrator, he says, people come and go in and out of our lives like busboys in a restaurant. And you don't realize that when you're a kid. You know, when you're a kid, there's this feeling of timelessness in a sense. There's this way in which you think everything's going to last forever, and it doesn't. One of the great things that also happens in childhood is that if we're lucky, we learn that the substance of anything that matters is love. Anything that we have that's worth holding on to from the past is often something that came from a direct experience of love. It's not something we did. It's not something that we didn't do. It's not something that got broken or that got fixed. There's a quality when we're young of timelessness. And there's more, it's like it's just a little easier to get to love sometimes. So that's a quality of childhood. Interestingly, I was just talking to my uncle who is ready to leave his body. He's in hospice care right now. And I was saying goodbye to him on the phone last week. And as I was talking to him and also reflecting on having to say goodbye to my grandmother last year, my grandfather the year before that, another grandfather the year before that, my grandparents all leaving the planet, I thought about how it's also a secret of the very old. The times that I spent with my grandma and the time that I spent with my uncle saying goodbye, I also found out one of my childhood friends this past week, found out one of my childhood friends, next door neighbor kid, is leaving his body right now from cancer. He's only 40, got 2 kids. But a secret that the old have as well as the young, and anyone who's close to death, really, is timelessness, the timelessness of love. The conversation I shared with my uncle, the conversation that I shared with my grandma before she passed, there were things that were shared that were simple, that were vulnerable, that will not greatly alter the future, that cannot greatly change the past, that were just true and sincere and heartfelt. And because of those sharings, because of the outpouring of heart, the relationship becomes something that now exists from time immemorial. Its history is eternal now, and its future is eternal now. And that happens when we have to shed a little blood, metaphorically speaking, to get into the heart. We have to bleed a little bit for other people. People, oh, you're bleeding heart. We have to bleed a little bit to just share what's real, who we are, what's going on. And what we get as a result is we get the timelessness of love. And that timelessness of love is not something that pits us against the past. It's not something that pits us against the future. It's not something that annihilates time itself. It's something that teaches us how to move through all seasons of time, all eras of time, all changes in history. And it teaches us how to be lighthearted and in love, even at the most historically weighty moments where it feels like so much is at stake. It helps us to remember that the cry of the heart, the simple outpouring of the heart, no matter what time we're in, no matter how weighty it is, that is where the real substance of the soul makes any kind of season in our life precious and sacred. That's what we're living for. That's what we actually want. So I wanted to share this with you guys today so that we could think a little bit about the historical weightiness of the moment, to call ourselves out if we think that our peace, our happiness lies in restoring some kind of past that's been broken or moving into some brave new world that's yet to be. Those narratives will play out on the stages of our life fine. We don't have to try to dismiss them or pretend like they aren't real or that they're not relevant. Those narratives are important. We'll be involved with them. How could we not be? Can we bring just a little bit of timelessness and of love and affection toward whatever we're doing? That's ultimately where we are. That's our ultimate destination. It's like what we're looking for is a passport so that wherever we go, past, present, future, in this great eternal cycle of time, the endlessness of time, it's like we're looking for a passport so that we can go freely wherever the winds of change and time may take us. That passport is called love. It's easy to forget. So I like to think sometimes when I'm at moments in my life that feel historically weighty, like there's big choices, big decisions, I have to make the right choice to create the right future, or I've gotten off track and I feel like I've lost my wholeness and I have to restore it, and I'm feeling all of this. I don't know why I'm getting so emotional, but I like to think of myself as I'm still walking down the street with my friend, but my friend is now God, reality, the universe, anyone and anything. And in moments where I feel historical weight on my soul, the big turns in the narrative, they feel sort of apocalyptic in some way. Try to picture myself walking down the street and thinking, what does universe want from me right now? What is the real import of this moment historically? And that is that every moment historically is a brand new, completely unique and different season, era, no matter if it lasts 1,000 years or 2 seconds, in which to share something brand new from your heart. And that thing that is brand new from your heart is the most precious gift. It's the most valuable thing that we have to give each other. It's the only thing that God wants from us. And when we do that, it's amazing how the narrative arc of our life changes in ways that are unexpected and beautiful, beyond what we can control or author. The past and the future come together in ways that we can't expect. And our friendship with reality, our love with reality is brought out more and more. And then it's just like, it's not a matter of where we're heading or where we've been, even though the history is real, you know. We're open-hearted and ready for it. So I wanted to share this message. I had no idea I would get emotional, but it's a difficult thing saying goodbye to people. And it's been on my mind lately a lot. Another story I'll share with you guys, I guess, just before we close, is that my wife got the flu the other night, and I laid in bed with my daughters, and she went to lay on the couch. And I was laying there with my daughters, and I was thinking, this is just such a vulnerable space. They're little. The flu preys on, the elderly and the young. And I don't want to see. It was just hard for me to imagine my little girl's bodies being racked by what my wife was going through. And, you live in a house, it's a petri dish. So thankfully everyone's on the mend. Everyone's good. But as I was laying there, I was getting emotional again, just thinking about these aren't my girls. This isn't my wife. These are, they're on loan to me, right? And their destinies are being guided in ways that, are beyond my ability to fathom or comprehend, even as an astrologer who can look at their charts or whatever. And I was just feeling very vulnerable in that. They say that like having kids is like having your heart walking outside of your chest. It's true. Anyway, I was feeling really vulnerable about it. And I was just shedding some tears and really just sort of in that moment of feeling afraid about the future a little bit, like what if something happened to them? What would I do? Whatever. I actually was thinking about the same thing, about the same idea, which is that right now what's really important is that in this moment, my fear of the future, my anxiety, whatever, this authentic emotion that's welling up within me, I'm going to take that. In Bhakti, we say, I'm just going to take the leap of imagining that what I'm feeling right now, whatever it is, it's not something I have to clean up or dress up. It's something I have to offer up. So one of my practices, and maybe it can help you too, is if you're feeling the weight of history in the year ahead, you're feeling the uncertainty of the future and what it might hold, especially the fear of loss in the future, anxiety about the future. I find that just like sort of taking that moment to find a way of giving your emotion like you're walking with reality down the street. Like, look, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm afraid of. And then just maybe just imagining that actually hearing from you and your honesty makes reality happy. And that if you believe that divinity is listening and that divinity's most enjoyable thing is to hear you pour out your authentic, non-petitioning, not asking for anything, just like, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm afraid of. Just hold me, give me some love. This is my love for you. I'm giving you my honesty, my frustration, my worry, my concern. And I'm just opening my heart to hearing whatever you have to say, whatever that might be. And maybe even asking the universe to help you love whatever it has to say, whatever it may say in response. But I think that opening ourselves up in the year ahead and sharing wherever we're at is going to be almost more important than feeling like we make the correct choices or decisions or adjustments in this big sort of grand historical epic moment, which Jupiter in Capricorn is prone to produce. Time is also timeless. There's both at once happening. And time is so much easier when we see it as a friend that we can talk to and open up with. Then it becomes timeless. All seasons of time become our friends. So I am honored to share this journey with all of you who I consider friends in a weird way. And I hope that this blesses you and is something that's helpful for you as you walk the path with Jupiter in the next year. All right. Well, until next time, take care, everyone.